All right, I'm going to share my screen so that I can talk about my audit presentation and findings. All right. All right, everybody. Sorry about that. All right, good to go. So I chose to audit the end of unit summative assessment for the Georgia DOE fifth grade unit 1, which is investigating volume of solid figures. It's a mathematical assessment on paper consisting of 8 multi-part questions and a final performance-based task. The standards in this unit cover discovering the volume of right rectangular prisms and writing, interpreting, and evaluating numerical expressions. The assessment requires students to analyze real-world scenarios and word problems to create and evaluate mathematical expressions. Students must answer questions using both visual representations and written explanations to justify the reasonings of their answer. Questions on the assessment require students to determine the volume of right rectangular prisms through area models, creation of tables identifying possible dimensions, those being length, width, and height, for a given total volume, and to identify an unknown height when given the area of the base of a rectangular prism. All right, so given that basic explanation of the assessment itself, the rationale behind it, I chose this specific assessment because I administered it this past school year after we had implemented the Unit 1 DOE curriculum with Fidelity. That was the first year we had done that. And the results when we gave the assessment were analyzed to determine which questions the kids were answering incorrectly. So I sat together with my team and we looked through it, and we had to discuss whether the rigor of these questions were higher than our students could handle. We also discussed if we were effectively preparing students to work through multi-step and higher cognitive demand questions throughout the unit in order to prepare our students for this unit assessment we gave. Overall, we felt we did not prepare students with the instruction that aligned with the assessment. So I want to adjust my instruction so that the taught, the learned, and the assessed curriculum are fully aligned, thus preparing my students for the Georgia milestones. That's my reasoning behind why I chose this assessment. So as I go into the standards of the assessment, so the first standard that I analyzed with the SIT protocol says investigate volume of right rectangular prisms by packing them with unit cubes without gaps or overlaps, and then determine the total volume to solve problems. So the SIP protocol for that standard 1 revealed the task requires more than the standard states, including that creation of table to display data related to finding total volume. Although the students know the dimensions of a right rectangular prism, that the process is they're being multiplied to find the total area, and finding the area of the base and then determining the total volume by using those layers of the prism. The standard's cognitive demand is about a level 1 or 2 or 3. I apologize, level 2 or 3 for the standard. But the task, which is asking for the creation of a table to display data, requires a significantly higher cognitive demand. Create is a level 6, so it's very misaligned in cognitive demand for that standard to the task. Standard 2 was discover and explain how the volume of right rectangular prisms can be found by multiplying the area of the base times the height to solve real-life mathematical problems. The SIP protocol for this standard 2 revealed that there is a partial misalignment of the standard's cognitive levels required, a partial misalignment to the content covered, skills needed, and the conditions qualifiers. Overall, the misalignment lies in the lower cognitive demand of the standard compared to the tasks that are on that assessment. For example, students may know how to calculate the area of the base, and based on the number of layers of height can determine the total volume. But the task requires students to manipulate the dimensions of the base when the height is halved, and then justify their reasoning for the change in dimensions, and this requires a higher cognitive demand. Standard 3 is to write, interpret, and evaluate simple numerical expressions involving whole numbers with or without grouping symbols to represent real-life situations. The SIP protocol for this standard 3 revealed that the task is properly aligned to the standard. The cognitive demand is a partial match due to the task requiring analysis for part 1 of a question. The content match in the task and standard, they do match, but the students must be proficient in word problem analysis and also knowing what operations match the word problem accurately. So they need to know the keywords and what keywords mean the operation of multiplication, what keywords mean the operation of division or addition or subtraction. So the skill components do match, but the standard does not specify the use of visual representation when evaluating the word problem and the expression. So my overall alignment findings through all the standards, all the tasks for this assessment and the tasks Uh, the overall alignment of the standard to the unit assessment reveals a consistent pattern where the assessment tasks require either deeper cognitive level or deeper content knowledge to complete the task. Specifically, Standard 1 has students creating tables to display data instead of providing the table so that students can focus on that cognitive demand and mathematical operation for solving for volume. Instead, they're focusing on being able to create the table instead of what it's supposed to be asking them. Standard 2 is misaligned in the same way, with the task requiring students to manipulate the dimensions of the base when the height is halved and then justify their reasoning for this change. And this, once again, is a higher cognitive demand than the standard requires. So, given my overall findings, I'm going into my recommendations. So, I have 3 recommendations for improving instruction leading up to giving this assessment. Recommendation 1 to the instruction leading up to the assessment is adjusting Unit 1 lesson pacing to include more opportunities for students to write, interpret, and evaluate simple numerical expressions. Items 1 through 3 on the assessment require the students to evaluate real-world scenarios unrelated to finding volume. However, the instruction only connects numerical expressions to the dimensions of prisms when solving volume. Students need opportunities to analyze word problems for keywords, indicating operations during instruction in order to be prepared for the questions on the assessment. So there's just not enough lessons in the unit to prepare kids for questions 1 through 3 on the assessment. Even though it does incorporate the standard, it doesn't teach the kids to use them in context other than volume. My second recommendation to the instruction pertains to lesson 3 in the unit design, which is called Layers in a Prism. This requires solving volume with dimensions including fractions. So this needs to be changed to only using whole numbers when solving for volume due to the conditions and qualifiers of that standard, GSR 8.4. Left as the lesson currently is, which is including those fractional dimensions, is only going to cause misconceptions and ineffectively prepare our students for the unit assessment. So if the standard doesn't require them to be doing the dimensions with fractions and it's not on the assessment, I was confused on why it was incorporated into the lesson called Layers in a Prism in the unit design. My third recommendation to the instruction pertains to specifically lesson 2. It's called Volume with QB, and this introduces and connects seeing volume patterns. Now, it's important for them to see these volume patterns, how you have a layer at the base, and whatever the area of that base is, however many layers up, there are patterns. So if the base is 6, then it goes 6, 12, 18, 24, like seeing those patterns. However, in this lesson, students are seeing the data displayed on a coordinate grid. And if you look at the Georgia DOE unit pacing, coordinate grids are introduced almost at the very end of the fifth grade year. Keep in mind, this is unit 1 of instruction. So they have never been exposed in previous grade levels, really. They don't know what coordinate grids are. So to be thrown into the second lesson at the beginning of a school year, I just feel like it would cause unnecessary frustration and confusion to students. Moving on to my recommendations for revising the assessment. So I believe they should provide a table to display the data in item 6 of that assessment instead of requiring students to create their own table. The main reason this change should occur is because students may understand how to do the problem, how to solve the problem and insert the dimensions into a table, but they may not know how to create a table from scratch. By providing that table in item 6, the cognitive demand of the standard and the instruction is going to match, and it'll set the students better up for success. My second and last recommendation for revising the assessment is changing item 5 on the assessment to not mention capacity. As it is currently written, students are expected to see the connection in the word problem between capacity and how that relates to finding volume. Well, capacity and volume are never related in the instruction leading up to the assessment, and students may not realize the problem is asking them to solve for volume because it's mentioning not volume but capacity. So removing or changing item 5 on the assessment reduces that possible student confusion due to misalignment of that standard and task. So after my recommendations, I go into my next steps. For my next steps in this curriculum audit process, I need to present my audit findings directly to my grade level team, so we are all aligned before the kids start back in August. Unit 1 is our first unit in math, so pre-planning is the best time for me to share my findings of this audit with my team. Next, we need to make some instructional adjustments before we begin teaching the unit. Specifically, prior to giving the Unit 1 assessment, I'll be revising the Georgia DOE lessons to weave in more practice with that numerical expression standard, specifically focusing on how those numerical expressions connect to word problems, not just letting it be related to how it is in the lessons currently, where it's related to volume only. I think students are going to need modeling and practice of analyzing keywords in word problems that indicate operations and how that then relates to writing the expression. So incorporating more of those lessons all needs to be planned during pre-planning prior to giving the lessons in Unit 1 and obviously prior to then giving this Unit 1 assessment. Now, my last next step goes to taking these audit findings to Jennifer Moss. She's our Chief Academic Officer for our district. And the goal of that meeting would be to have a collaborative discussion about how we can either edit or completely replace the assessment moving forward to better serve our students. This is my audit findings presentation. Thank you guys so much for listening.